Chapter 5. New Zealand. March 1964. The new biochemistry and physiology block of St Swithin's Hospital was being opened by Her Majesty the Queen Mother. At the time, being Secretary of the Students' Union, I was invited to join Her Majesty for tea with other representatives of the student body after her tour of the new premises. The Queen Mother had an excellent complexion and was extremely charming. I was very pleased to find out that she had asked to come to tea with the students, and not with a lot of old gits in red gowns and stupid floppy hats. During tea, I explained to Her Majesty that I had the offer of going to New Zealand as a member of the cast of Cambridge Circus, a revue, but that this would mean taking 6 months off medicine, and my parents had yelped strongly against this. The royal person said, "It's a beautiful place, you must go." I used this remark on my parents as if it was a royal command, and it worked. My mother was now able to go into the butcher's shop and say, "Oh, the Queen Mother said he must go." 10 minutes later, I was on a plane to Christchurch. John Cleese had a shower in Karachi, lost his watch and held up the plane for an hour while he looked for it. I didn't particularly mind the delay because I was sitting next to a rather nice-looking Commonwealth sailor. We arrived at Sydney at 7:10, and I took the next plane for Christchurch at 12:20. Christchurch was a shithole of a place, made all the worse because we'd left England in spring and arrived there in autumn. It was pissing down rain and cold. We were taken to a temperance hotel made of wood. After an appalling meal, we were shown to our rooms. Mine was so cold and damp, and there was mildew on the bed covers. The whole group moved to a hotel built of brick that served drinks to the residents. You have to bear in mind that the licensing laws in New Zealand at that time meant that bars could only open between 5:30 p.m. and 6 p.m. This meant, of course, that at 6:10 p.m. the streets were full of white New Zealanders beating up Maoris, or the other way round, depending on who had managed to get the most drunk quickest. We felt very privileged at the access to drink and warm beds, and slept quite happily until noon the next day. John Cleese and myself decided to have lunch at the hotel because we were performing in the theatre that afternoon and evening, and it didn't seem likely that we would get a meal. I asked for a 3-egg omelette. The waitress was astonished and said, "What?" I said, "A 3-egg omelette," and pointed to the words on the menu saying 3-egg omelette. She said, "A 3-egg omelette?" And I said, "Yes," pointing again. 5 minutes later she returned with a large omelette with 3 fried eggs on top. Even people 3 tables away threw up. We flew to Dunedin, a town in the south of the island, named after a mixture of Edinburgh and Dundee, and with a perceptible Scottish influence. After a couple of days there, we flew to Timaru, a town about the size of my house, the only difference being that there is no seafront in Highgate, and Timaru doesn't have a theatre as big as mine. I wanted to see the mountains, the New Zealand Alps, and managed to persuade John Cleese and Tim Brooke-Taylor to join me in paying for a flight around them. It was a spiffing flight with heavenly views that really gripped you by the balls. Well, actually, the bit between your balls and your asshole. They were great, with a capital G, 1 R, 1 E, 1 A, and a T in lower case. The single-prop 4-seater Cessna's engine purred as Captain W.E. Hillary flew us across mountain ridges, emerald-green chasms in the ice, and countless glaciers. We landed on one of the glaciers that had been counted. "Crikey," whistled Ginger Brooke-Taylor. "Damn good thing old Groupie put the skis on the old underbelly." "Yes," confided John Algy Cleese into his air-sickness bag as we came into land on the Fox Glacier. Tim and I stepped out of the plane, exhilarated and confident, and sank into 4 feet of snow. Apart from that, nothing happened. Group Captain W.G. Grace taxied the plane round for takeoff, the engine revved, and the Cessna shot off for all the world like a gannet into the blue with bits of white. We yelled and stamped so much with indignation that we sank another foot into the snow, and, as luck would have it, thereby attracting the attention of Sir Edmund Hillary and Uffa Fox, who had been playing poker for several months in their marooned Ford Anglia while waiting for the snow to thaw. At first they were alarmed at our intrusion. They wanted to be alone together. The atmosphere was tense. Excuse me. Excuse me. Can you tell me the way to Timaru?" I volunteered. After my tour of New Zealand and 3 months in New York with Cambridge Circus, I came back to St Swithin's to pass pathology and therapeutics extremely well, narrowly missing one of the 2 prizes in therapeutics. Well, at least I was in the last 6. Then came my final exams: medicine, surgery, midwifery, and gynecology. Medicine I felt I didn't deserve to pass, but did, realizing how little you know is the first step towards, etc., etc. Surgery I should have passed, but didn't. I knew that I'd passed on my paper, and my short cases were simple enough. A row of about 10 patients you have to diagnose quickly and suggest possible treatments for. And for my long case, I had an extremely cooperative patient who told me much more than she should have about her thyrotoxicosis and its surgical treatment. Unfortunately for me, a rather silly man, a pompous surgeon wearing a scarlet gown and a silly floppy hat for the sole purpose of intimidating examinees, asked me where I'd been trained. He took exception to the fact that it was St. Swithin's, and in particular had great personal animosity towards the beast. I failed. Midwifery I felt I should have passed, but did rather mess up my long case, never having encountered a pregnant dwarf with unusual hip deformities as a result of a road accident during any of my tuition, even in any textbook small print. This meant that I had 6 months to spend before I could take the examinations again. I didn't need to do a great deal of work on surgery, just keep my revision topped up. I read for about an hour a day and went to the occasional ward round. My tutor in gynecology and midwifery was so enraged at my failure that he gave me a third-degree grilling in his weekly tutorials that I attended. This left the rest of my time free to write with John Cleese and to go to script conferences for the Frost Report, a programme featuring D. Paradine Frost, J. Cleese, R. Barker and R. Corbett. My introduction to fellow writers Michael Palin, Terry Jones, Eric Idle, Barry Cryer, Dick Vosper, David Nobbs, etc., was a very happy one, and at the end of a very successful run of 13 half-hour programmes, I had no problem with midwifery and gynecology and passed quite easily. Surgery, too, seemed to be easier this time, with the exception of an extremely uncooperative patient for my long case. A fat lump of a man of 45 years of age, whose only complaint was painful ankles and a mild chronic bronchitis. This could have been arthritis because of his obese condition, but that just wasn't enough to discuss for my main case. I started again and asked him about his weight, whether he had lost or gained any weight recently. No, he insisted he hadn't. His weight had remained the same for years. After a complete re-examination, I had nothing to add to my findings, and the prospect of failure loomed as I approached the professor of surgery. I told him what I had found, and he agreed and said, "And?" Well, that's all, sir." "Did you ask him about his weight?" "Yes, sir. He said it's been the same for years." "Did he? Are you sure you asked him about his weight?" For some reason, my confidence returned. I didn't want to go through all this again. "Yes, I asked him several times. He said it had stayed the same." "I don't think so," added another examiner at the professor's side. "Well, go and ask him," I almost shouted. This they did, and came back, and the professor said somewhat apologetically, "What would you have thought if he'd told you he had lost 2 stones in weight in the last month?" "Cancer, sir." "Whereof?" "Lung, sir." "Look at those x-rays." I did. There was the growth. This man had been selected as a difficult lung case purely because the only indicative symptoms were recent weight loss accompanied by swollen ankles, a variant of peripheral pulmonary arthropathy commonly seen in the fingers but then only recently described as a diagnostic sign in the ankle. After this, I happily went through the suggested courses of treatment and the prognosis for the patient. They were pleased, I passed, I was pleased.